All right, good. This today, I'll just tell you over a speech of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which was from 1982. I'll tell it over outside of the book. And regarding the Torah portion with the commentary from the Chumash, I put up, as I did the last couple of days this week, last year's. So you'll like it. It's interesting. All right, here we go. And this week we see a very interesting thing, that Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to find a match, a proper bride for Yitzchak, Isaac. Yitzchak is Abraham's son. So Eliezer goes, and there's a tremendous detail. A lot of sentences, a lot of words are used to tell the story. Although later on in the Torah, there's whole laws that are learned from just one word. Right? Just let's take an example: the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments says, "Keep the day of Shabbat." From that comes hundreds and thousands of laws. What does it mean to keep the day of Shabbat? So the Torah is very economical with its words, and here it gives a tremendous long detail. So it explains one of the reasons is because this marriage between Yitzchak and Rivka, it's not just the beginning of the Jewish people, even though it is that. And that would have been enough, actually. But really, it's the beginning of the whole entire revelation that Moshiach is going to bring, namely that God will be revealed in the world, like it was in the Holy Temple, but it'll be in the whole world. And even more, so this even prepared the unity of Yitzchak and Rivka, spiritually opened up the door for the revelation of Mount Sinai, which essentially the revelation of Mount Sinai, that was the precursor of the Holy Temple, because Sinai was just temporary, of the Holy Temple, and that was more permanent, even though it wasn't really permanent, because first and seconds were destroyed. First and second temples were destroyed. But it's even more so. So that was also a preparation. It's preparing the way for the Moshiach, who will unite the heavens and the earth, God and the creation. So let's go into this. Okay, so it says one of the details it says over here in this story about Eliezer. So Eliezer, he doesn't exactly know what to do. Abraham sent him out and said, I want you to take a son from somebody from my family, not from the daughters of Canaan. And that's it. It didn't give him any details, how tall, what color eyes, what her background has to be, her age, nothing. So he goes, Eliezer goes, and he says, okay, what am I going to do? You know what I'll do? I'll make a sign like this. I'm going to go to the well of water. A young girl that comes out and says, let me draw water. Wasn't easy to draw water. It wasn't turning on a faucet. You had to draw out the water. I'll draw water out for you, and I'll draw out for your camels also, as that's the one I want. So it says, before he even finished speaking, Terem Kilala Daber, what is this? One second. Excuse me, 1 minute. Here it is. Terem Kilala Daber, before he even finished speaking, all of a sudden comes out Rivka. She comes out. She was 3 years old at that time. It doesn't make any difference. As she came out, and she was the daughter of Bethuel, her brother, right? And Bethuel and his uncle was Lavan. And there she is. So it says, before he finished speaking, his prayers were answered, his words were answered. So the Mishnah, the Gemara says that there are 3 people. Maybe it's a midrash, I think. There's 3 people that immediately, when they spoke, they were answered. Usually, when you make a prayer to God or you say something, a condition, it takes a little while to get answered. But there are three that were answered immediately, and one of them was Eliezer here. Another one was Moshe. There's a story in the Torah that there was a person, very gifted, very talented, tremendously rich, successful person called Korach. And he was in the family of Moses. He was also a Levite. And it enumerates the reasons why. There's a whole portion of the Torah, the whole chapter of the Torah called in his name. In any case, he made a rebellion against Moses, and everybody agreed with him. Everyone was on his side. They were all against Moses. So Moses said, Moshe says, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to make a contest like this. If a new thing happens and the ground opens up and swallows you guys up, then I'm right. If not, then not. Immediately Moses finished speaking, the ground opened up and swallowed him up. Well, immediately it is. Then there was another person. This happened afterwards. Eliezer, of course, was, 400 years before Moses. Then there comes a similar story. This is like 500 years after Moses. King Solomon, he builds a holy temple, and he prays to God, God, make your presence revealed in the temple. As soon as he finishes speaking, fire comes down from heaven, and God's presence is revealed in the temple. First temple, of course, that King Solomon prayed. And so here we have these three that were answered immediately. So at first glance, it doesn't seem so clear. I mean, why were these three? We have Moses, first of all, was obviously a Jew. King Solomon was a Jew. Eliezer wasn't even Jewish. He wasn't Jewish. He was the servant of Abraham. Okay, good. So why was he put together with this? Why was he answered immediately afterwards? And what? So the Midrash even goes on and it says even more that Eliezer was better than Moses because Moses and King Solomon, because Moses and King Solomon, they were answered immediately after they prayed, and he was answered before he even finished. So Eliezer, not only can you wonder why was he included with these holy tzaddikim, righteous people, even though that it says he was also a righteous person, he was tremendously devoted to, but nevertheless, he was not one of the founders of Judaism. Why was he included? And even more, he says he was better. He was better than them. He was answered immediately. So the Rebbe gives an answer, and he says, obviously, the reason that these three were answered was not so much because of who they were, but what they were requesting. I mean, it has to be added that these three were also very holy and devoted people. Eliezer, in some ways, even more than the other two, because Eliezer, he was the servant of Abraham. He went against his nature to be a servant. He didn't do anything that he wanted. He did everything that Abraham wanted. And even though that Moses and King Solomon, they did only what God wanted, but they wanted to do what God wanted. Okay, but the Rebbe doesn't say that. What does he say? He says we have to look at the goal. What did they want? What did all these three want? All three wanted the same thing, but a little bit different degree, to different degrees. King Solomon, he wanted that God's presence should be revealed in the temple. Moses wanted that God's presence should be revealed, what's happening, in him, in a person. So there's a stand. 1 minute. Okay. And Moses, in a person. And Eliezer, he wanted that God should be revealed in the world, housed in the world. So we'll see in a minute. Let's first of all, let's take it as sort of reverse chronological order. We have King Solomon. What did King Solomon want? King Solomon wanted that the holiness of the Torah should be revealed in this world. The whole essence of what the Holy Temple was the Torah. In the Holy of Holies, there was the tablets. In the second temple, there was also the tablets, but it was buried down underneath, it says. But nevertheless, that's the whole thing. to show that the Torah is godly. That's the Holy Temple. The Holy Temple was a place people would go and they would see God. What do you mean they would see God? They would go and they would see that they are just creations. They would go and they would see and they would feel that they are just creations of God. That's the temple. So King Solomon, his goal was to reveal God in the world. That's a very good thing, because the fact of the matter is that the whole entire world depends only on the Torah. The world is created from the Torah. It says that if the Jews would not have received the Torah, if they refused, then there wouldn't be any world. God would have just returned the world back to nothing. So the whole world is intrinsically bound up or depends on the Torah. But nevertheless, the way that King Solomon wanted to reveal it was, there was a building, and in this building would be revealed God. So you go to the building of the Holy Temple, and you would feel that God is in the building. So it's sort of like two separate things, sort of. There's the building, and then there is God revealed in the building, God's revelation. Not only that, the revelation that was in the temple, it wasn't permanent. The temples were destroyed. And not only that, you would go to the temple and you see God only when there was service in the temple. In the nighttime, for instance, there was no service in the temple. There were no sacrifices. Also, the main thing was 3 times a year they would go. That's when they would see God. 3 times a year they would go up for the holidays. So in other words, there was a revelation of God, but it was only piecemeal. And it was only, intermittently, once in a while. Okay. Moses then, it was a little bit more of a revelation. He wanted to reveal that God reveals himself in people. That's what prophecy is. Prophecy is that God reveals himself in people. According to Judaism, only a Jew can actually be a prophet, but God did reveal himself in other people. We see that Bilam, he was there's a whole chapter called on him, and he made the biggest prophecies about Moshiach. It was Bilam. We see that God appeared to Lot. God appeared. Okay, but nevertheless, the main thing of prophecy is that God unites himself with a human being. So the human being's intelligence becomes the intelligence of God. He says what God wants. He thinks what God wants him to think. And those words come out. So that's a little more permanent than the Holy Temple, right? If God unites himself with a person, so that was more permanent. But the fact is that prophecy also stopped. The Rebbe said that it resumed again after but nevertheless, there were times when there was prophecy and times when there wasn't prophecy. Not everyone could be a prophet, which is not the case. Now let's take Eliezer. What did Eliezer want? He wanted a marriage between Rivka and Yitzchak. Rivka and Yitzchak, as we learned in the Hasidic classes in the morning, even though they were two separate people, they were people, but they embodied these two aspects of God. Something like Adam, the first man, he embodied God's presence in the world. His job was to fix up the world. He didn't do it. So it came down to Yitzchak. Yitzchak was embodying God's presence in the world, since he was the spiritual aspect of this name of God, which is called 45, Mem He. And Rivka, she represents the world. That's God's name, which is Ban, 52. There's ways to how you deduce these numbers, right? It's by filling up phonetically the letters of God's name, it comes out to a different amount. For instance, the 4 letters of God's name are Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav and Hey. So each one of them has a numerical value. Yud is 10, Hey is 5, that's 15, Vav, that's 26, 15, I'm sorry, that's 21, and another Hey in the end, that's 26, altogether 26. So, but if you fill up the Yud, spell it phonetically, Yud, Vav, Daled, then the Yud is not just 10 anymore. You also add on the Vav and the Daled, which is another 10. So it comes out to the 60. So anyway, there's different ways of filling up these letters. So you get these different gematrias and numerical values, but that's just, interesting stuff. These values and numbers, they stand for creative powers. They're more real than this world that we're living in. The world is created as a result of them. So the unification of Ma and Ban, which was accomplished by uniting Yitzchak and Rivka, this is a preparation for the revelation, permanent revelation of God in the world that began in Mount Sinai, and it increased until it got to the level in the Holy Temple, where it was more permanent. And then it was also in the prophecies, because the whole essence of Judaism is prophecy, that Moses prophesied. The whole Torah is Moses' prophecy. Except for the first two of the Ten Commandments, the Jews heard everything except everything from Moses. The first two Ten Commandments they heard directly from God. But all the rest is Moses' prophecy. But finally, it's going to be what Eliezer worked for, and that was that God should be revealed in the world permanently. The whole world should be like a holy temple. The holy temple will be even higher. And that was accomplished by Eliezer. So because of the goal of Eliezer was to reveal God permanently, and in a way that, and therefore it was answered immediately. Why? Because if a person is, let's say, close to somebody, he's a friend with him, so if he promises him something, so he gives it to him quickly. A person with his own children, if he really loves them, then he's united with them, then he does it even more quickly. A person with himself, right? Let's say a person puts his hand into fire or whatever by accident. So immediately he jumps out because he's what's called davuk. It's one. So Eliezer's job was not just to reveal God in the world, but to reveal that the world is part, if you want to say it, of godliness. Without God, there's no world. Without the Torah, there's no world. So Eliezer wanted to show that the world and God are really one. The world doesn't really exist on its own. It's just so that it's immediately. So therefore, he was answered. The other two were answered quickly because they were close to God. But his level that he wanted to reveal was davuk. It was one with God. And that's what he wanted to reveal. And that's the purpose of the Jewish people. And that's why we take so much time and many words that are devoted in the Torah, and every word in the Torah is so precious, every letter is pure godliness. Why there has to be so many letters? Because this is talking about the goal of the Jewish people, to reveal pure godliness in the world, or even more, to reveal that the whole world depends on pure godliness. It's being created by God from nothing all the time. So it depends. And that's what he revealed. That's what Eliezer revealed. That's all. So therefore, Eliezer was answered immediately, just like King Solomon and Moses, because he had the same goal, revealing God in the world. But he was answered even before, because he wanted to reveal God in the world, not just in the Holy Temple and not just in prophets, but in the whole world itself. That's the unification of Yitzchak and Rivka. But there's another attribute also. It explains that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they correspond to the three aspects of God, which Abraham is God's kindness, Yitzchak is God's severity or power, and Jacob is God's balance or beauty. And it says that in the merit of Yitzchak, of the power of Yitzchak, that's what's really going to bring the future redemption. Because what did Yitzchak do? What's an example of the manifestation of this power? Is he dug wells. In other words, he would go into a place where there was desert, and he would change the desert. Everybody would say, you're nuts. What are you wasting your time? You're in the desert. It's hot. There's no water to drink. He says, there's going to be water to drink. And he would dig for a day, dig for 2 days, for 5 days. They'd have to bring him water to drink. Let's leave. Let's go. No, we're digging. And he would dig for who knows how long he dug, and he would reveal water. And as soon as he revealed water, that would change everything. As soon as there was water, then people would be able to come and work there. They had food. They would bring their camel. They could irrigate the land. They could bring their cattle, their livestock. They could irrigate the land. Other people came. There were needs. You build houses. As soon as there's water, then there's life. And that's what Yitzchak did. That's gevura. That's gevura, power. To change things, to use your power to change the world. And that's the thing of Yitzchak. That's also the idea of happiness, tzchok, Yitzchak, to be happy. In other words, to see a negative situation, a desert, and to transform it into something alive and happy, like digging wells and happiness. So that's why Eliezer was answered before he finished, because that's the thing of gevura, to change the situation as soon as possible. This is the power also that Moshiach will reveal in the world, that each one of us has the ability to change the entire world now. Have a good day with Moshiach now, and God willing, 8:15 tomorrow morning we learn Chassidut.